The audition hall was already filled with tension long before the boy and his mother walked in. It was one of those days where nothing seemed to go right. The Performing Arts Center held open auditions once a year, and talented kids from many towns came hoping to win a place in the academy. But that morning, the director had already listened to more than a dozen performances, and none of them were what he expected. Some children forgot their notes halfway. Some froze the moment they sat down at the piano. Others played softly as if they were afraid of touching the keys. The director tried to stay patient, but his expression showed everyone how tired he was. Staff members whispered among themselves, trying to guess when the next break would be. The assistant stood near the door with a clipboard, calling the next participants one by one. Everyone could feel the pressure building, and the director, known for his strictness, didn't hide his frustration. Just then, the door opened again, and a young boy stepped inside. He looked much younger than most of the other kids. His clothes were simple and slightly worn, the kind that showed he didn't come from a wealthy background. His shoes had scuff marks, and his sleeves were a little too long for his small arms. He walked quietly, staying close to his mother, who gave him a gentle smile to keep him calm. Some of the staff noticed the pair and exchanged quick looks. Not angry or rude, just the kind of glance that said they didn't expect much. One of the stage helpers even whispered, "He looks so nervous. Poor kid. This might be over quickly." Another replied softly, "At least the director might get a short break after this one." The director heard the door behind him and looked up just enough to see the boy. He leaned back in his chair, tired and wanting anything to lift the pressure of the long day. He tried to make a light joke to ease the room. With a half smile, he said loudly, "If this kid plays something amazing, I'll kneel right here on the floor." He didn't say it with anger, more as a way to shake off the heavy mood surrounding everyone. A few staff members chuckled under their breath, not loudly, but just enough to break the tension. The boy heard the comment. His hands, already shaking slightly, tightened around the straps of his small backpack. He didn't understand whether the director meant it in a serious way or not, but he clearly felt the weight of being underestimated. His mother noticed his worried expression and gently placed her hand on his shoulder, whispering, "Just do your best. That's all you need to do." He nodded quietly and took a few slow steps toward the piano. The hall felt huge compared to his small frame. The bright lights shining on the stage made everything else seem dark and distant. Even though there were only a few people in the room, it felt like they were hundreds, all watching him, or waiting for him to sit down and play. The assistant checked the list and called out his audition number. His mother encouraged him again with a smile that was soft and full of belief. There was something warm in her eyes, something that showed she had complete trust in her child. Even when others did and single quotes to as he walked toward the piano, his footsteps sounded louder than they actually were. The floor felt like it echoed with every step he took. He kept his eyes on the ground, trying not to look at anyone. His hands were slightly trembling, but he tried to take slow breaths the way he used to do at home before practicing. The director rested his chin on his hand, watching casually, not expecting much but still polite enough to stay attentive. He didn't know anything about the boy's life, his struggles, or the long nights he spent practicing on an old keyboard with half-broken keys. All he saw was a quiet kid who looked like he didn't belong among the advanced students who usually came to audition. The staff waited silently, some trying to hide their boredom, others curious to see whether the boy would surprise them or simply confirm their assumptions. One of the judges beside the director whispered, "Let's just hope he doesn't freeze up like the last one." Another responded, "Well, if he does freeze, at least it won't last long." But the boy didn't seem to hear any of it. He reached the piano bench and paused for a moment. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, like he was carrying memories only he understood. His mother's hand gesture from across the room reminded him of the countless times she stood beside him when he practiced at home. He remembered the dim light in their small apartment, the worn-out keys on the old keyboard, the way he tried to replay melodies he heard online even when the sound was distorted. He carefully placed his backpack on the floor, then sat down on the bench. His feet didn't fully touch the ground, but he adjusted himself with quiet determination. He lifted his hands and hovered them above the keys, not touching them yet, just feeling the familiar weight of the moment. His eyes softened, and his breathing slowly steadied. The hall fell completely quiet. Even the soft rustling of papers paused. For a moment, the entire room watched this tiny figure sitting at a grand piano that looked almost too big for him. The contrast was striking, the massive concert instrument, and the small boy with a calm but determined expression. The director raised an eyebrow, curious despite himself. Something about the way the boy prepared his hands made him look different from the earlier participants. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't looking around nervously. He wasn't whispering last-minute rehearsals to himself. Instead, he closed his eyes for a second, as if replaying the music in his mind. No one in the hall knew that this boy never had formal lessons. He learned by watching videos, pausing them, rewinding them, and practicing late into the night while trying not to wake his mother. He learned to listen carefully, to understand patterns, to feel the rhythm and emotion in every note. Music became his way of remembering his father, who once repaired old instruments and taught him small bits before passing away. The boy carried those memories in his heart every time he sat at any piano, even an old keyboard at home. Back in the hall, the director finally straightened a little in his chair. Though he didn't show it, he felt a small shift in the atmosphere. The boy wasn't like the other kids who rushed or panicked. His calmness didn't come from confidence, it came from patience, from quiet practice, from understanding what music meant to him. The staff members also noticed the slight change. The stage helper, who earlier whispered doubts, now watched with a softer expression, almost feeling guilty for assuming the boy wouldn't do well. The assistant with the clipboard held her breath, sensing something unexpected might happen. Yet the room still held that same tension, the kind that made people expect the performance to end quickly. No one knew what was coming. No one had the faintest idea that the joke the director made minutes earlier might soon turn into a moment he would never forget. The boy finally opened his eyes, took one more long breath, and lowered his fingers to touch the keys. It wasn't forceful or rushed. It was gentle, the way someone touches something precious. The hall remained silent, waiting for the first note. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't think about the director's joke. He didn't think about the whispers or the long day the judges had gone through. He focused only on the keys in front of him, and the memories behind him. He was ready to play. The boy's fingers touched the keys gently, and in that moment, the world around him seemed to fade. The bright lights, the silent judges, the director's tired expression. The whispers from the staff, all of it suddenly felt far away. What remained was the familiar weight of the piano beneath his hands and the quiet memory of where his journey with music truly began. Long before he sat in that grand audition hall, he spent most of his evenings in a tiny apartment that barely had enough space for a dining table. In the corner of the living room stood an old keyboard that didn't even have all its keys working. Some buttons were cracked, some notes played too loudly, and some didn't work at all. But he loved that little keyboard. To him, it felt alive. Every scratch, every broken key carried memories of the person who kept it running. His father always sat beside that keyboard, fixing instruments for neighbors or repairing small radios that people brought to him. He didn't earn much, but he had hands that understood things: wires, screws, little circuits, and the hidden heart of anything that could make sound. While working, he often hummed melodies without even realizing it. The boy remembered the warm evenings when he sat next to his father, watching him carefully lift the keyboard's cover, tighten loose screws, and gently tap each key to test the sound. He didn't appreciate it fully then, but his father was teaching him something priceless. Not theory, not scales, not formal lessons, just a quiet love for sound, rhythm, and patience. The boy learned that music wasn't only about talent, it was about listening closely, deeply, honestly. After his father passed away, the apartment felt colder, quieter. The little keyboard didn't get repaired anymore, and some of the broken keys remained broken forever. But the boy still played. He played to remember. He played to fill the silence. He played to feel close to the person he missed the most. His mother noticed it. She worked long hours, sometimes leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. But whenever she came home, she often found him sitting on that keyboard, trying to copy melodies he heard on an old phone. She never stopped him. She never told him to sleep early or turn the volume down. She knew the music was all he had left of his father, so she let it stay. Sometimes she sat quietly behind him, watching him practice as if he were entering another world. His small fingers ran across the keys, testing each sound, repeating parts over and over, stopping only when he felt he finally got it right. He didn't need anyone to push him. He didn't need a teacher reminding him to practice. Something inside him wanted to understand music in a way words couldn't explain. Every night, before he went to sleep, he would close his eyes and replay the melodies in his head, imagining how they should sound on a real piano, one with proper keys, real weight, real resonance. He dreamed of touching a grand piano just once, not knowing when that chance would come. Months later, when his mother heard about the open auditions at the Performing Arts Center, she hesitated. She knew the kind of students who normally auditioned: kids with expensive lessons, perfect clothes, and supportive families who could afford everything. Her own son practiced on a keyboard that was older than him. She wondered whether he would feel discouraged or embarrassed, but he wasn't thinking about winning or impressing anyone. When she told him about the audition, he simply smiled shyly and said, "I just want to try a real piano." That was enough for her. The morning of the audition, they woke up early, ate a simple breakfast, and took a long bus ride to the city. The boy kept looking out the window, imagining the kind of pianos he would see. His mother sat quietly, hoping the day would be kind to him. She didn't expect miracles. She just wanted him to have a chance to be seen, to be heard, even if only for a few minutes. When they arrived at the hall, the boy felt small compared to the large building. Children were walking around with polished shoes, crisp music sheets, and confident expressions. Some practiced outside the hall, showing off fast scales and sharp techniques. The boy listened to them briefly, then stayed close to his mother, unsure if he belonged there, despite his doubts. He remembered the keyboard at home, the lessons learned without words, and the warmth in his father's humming voice. Those memories steadied him. And now, as he sat in front of the grand piano in the audition hall, those memories came rushing back like a comforting blanket. His hands stopped trembling, his breath became steady. The keys felt cold under his fingertips, but familiar, like returning to a place he had always wanted to be. He took another breath, remembering the small apartment, the soft hum of his father, the worn-out keyboard, and the long nights spent practicing until his fingers hurt. He remembered how his mother always told him, "You don't have to be the best, just be yourself." In the audition hall, the director shifted in his seat and waited, still expecting the performance to be short. The staff watched with half-interest, their minds preparing for another ordinary attempt. But something about the boy's posture, the calm way he sat, the gentle way he touched the keys, it hinted at a story none of them could see yet. The boy didn't start immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes again and mentally walked through the melody he practiced hundreds of times at home. He could almost see his father sitting beside him, tapping the keyboard gently to help him keep rhythm. He could almost hear his mother whispering encouragement from behind. Slowly, the weight of the hall disappeared, replaced by the simple warmth of those evenings in the small apartment. Then he pressed the first key. A soft note rang through the hall, clean and steady. It wasn't loud, but it carried something deeper, something gentle, honest, and full of emotion. The judges looked up immediately. The staff, who were previously bored, paused for a second. Even the director, who had leaned back casually, raised his head a bit. He didn't expect that kind of control from such a small child. The boy's fingers moved to the next note, and the melody began to flow smoothly. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply playing the way he used to at home, focused, lost in the world of sound. As he continued, memories of his father's repairs, the broken keys, the humming tunes, and his mother's tired smile layered themselves into every note. Each sound carried a piece of his life, of his struggles, of his longing. He didn't know how powerful it sounded to the listeners. To him, it was just the music he loved, the music that held his heart together. But to the people in the hall, it was something unexpected, something rare. The director leaned forward slightly, the joke he had made earlier fading from his mind. The judges exchanged subtle glances, as if realizing they were hearing something unusual. The staff stood a little straighter, suddenly paying full attention. The boy's hands glided across the piano with surprising ease. The broken keyboard at home had forced him to learn how to play by ear and feel rather than rely on technique. This gave his playing a natural flow, imperfect but emotional, raw but beautiful. Each note carried a story. Each pause held a memory. Each rise and fall in the melody reflected the long nights he spent practicing quietly as the world slept around him. His mother watched from her seat, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. She wasn't thinking about winning or losing. She wasn't thinking about the director's earlier joke. She was simply watching her child do what he loved most, on an instrument he rarely had the chance to touch. And in that moment, she felt proud, not because he played like a prodigy, but because he played with heart, courage, and sincerity. The boy didn't know how long he had been playing. He didn't count the minutes. He only followed the music where it naturally led him. When he reached the final part of the piece, his fingers slowed, pressing the last few keys with gentle intention, as if placing the final pieces of a puzzle. Then the room fell silent again. He lifted his hands slowly, letting the sound settle. He looked down at the keys for a moment, almost as if thanking them. He didn't know it yet, but that simple, heartfelt performance would change the entire room. For a long moment, nobody in the audition hall moved. It was as if the air itself froze right after the last note left the piano. The boy sat still with his hands resting gently on his lap, his eyes lowered, breathing softly. He wasn't thinking about the judges, or the director, or the staff standing around the room. He was simply coming back from the world he had disappeared into, the quiet world inside the music. The one he shared with memories of his father and the small apartment where he first learned to feel sound. The director was the first to react, though even he didn't move much. He blinked slowly, almost as if he needed to wake himself from a dream. A few minutes ago he had been sitting lazily in his chair, ready to get through yet another ordinary performance. He had even made a loud joke before the boy touched the piano, saying he would kneel if the child played well. Now, he wasn't laughing anymore. The smile had faded from his face, replaced by something close to disbelief. One of the judges sitting beside him leaned forward slightly and whispered, "Did you expect that?" The director didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was still trying to understand how someone so small, so quiet, and so untrained could play with such depth. The boy's hands were tiny, but the sound he brought out of the piano was full, warm, steady, and strangely powerful. At the back of the hall, two staff members who had earlier giggled at the director's joke slowly exchanged stunned glances. They had assumed the performance would end quickly, but the boy would play a few simple notes and leave the stage nervously like several kids before him. Instead, they had just stood through a performance that felt like something out of a concert, not an audition. The assistant holding the clipboard was so surprised that she forgot to check the next name on her list. She had watched dozens of children enter and leave the room all morning, but none of them made her stop and stare the way this small boy did. His playing had something raw in it, something real, something honest that you didn't often hear even from students who trained for years. The mother watched from her seat, her eyes shining with a mix of pride and relief. She knew how long her child practiced. She knew how many evenings he spent alone with the old keyboard because they couldn't afford real lessons. She knew how he found comfort in music after losing someone so important. But seeing him sit confidently in front of a huge grand piano and fill the hall with sound, that was something she never imagined she would witness. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from emotion. The boy finally lifted his head. His eyes moved slowly across the silent hall. He didn't see disappointment or boredom. Instead, he saw wide eyes, parted lips, and people leaning forward as if they were afraid to miss something. For a second, he didn't understand why everyone looked so surprised. To him, the performance wasn't anything extraordinary. It was just the melody he always played at home, the one he practiced until his wrists hurt and his shoulders grew tired. The director cleared his throat softly. It was the only sound that echoed through the stillness of the hall. He wasn't usually a man who showed emotion easily. He liked order, structure, and discipline. But now, he felt something warm in his chest, a mixture of admiration and shock. Before anyone could speak, the boy rested his hands on the edge of the piano and took a soft breath. He looked toward his mother, who gave him a nod full of encouragement. That tiny gesture gave him enough courage to stand up from the bench. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know if they wanted him to play more, or if they would simply thank him and move to the next person. He also didn't know whether he impressed them or disappointed them. Even though the room was silent, his heart beat loudly, making it difficult to predict what the adults would say. One of the judges finally leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. It wasn't a sigh of tiredness. It was one of those breaths a person takes when they've witnessed something unexpected and deeply moving. He opened the small notebook he had in front of him, but he didn't write anything. He didn't know what to write. The director, however, couldn't stay seated anymore. He straightened his body, sat fully upright, and placed both hands firmly on the table in front of him. He looked at the boy with a seriousness that made everyone in the hall hold their breath. "Do you play like this every time?" he asked quietly. His voice wasn't harsh. It wasn't sharp. It was calm, almost gentle, something nobody in the staff had seen from him all day. The boy swallowed and nodded shyly. "I always play this one at home," he said softly. "It's my favorite," a judge asked. "You learned this piece yourself?" The boy nodded again, his eyes lowering a little. "Yes, I don't have a teacher, so I just listen and try." The director leaned back slightly, absorbing that sentence. No teacher, no training, no formal lessons, and yet he played with emotion and maturity that even advanced students struggled to show. One of the staff members near the stage took a step forward, unable to stay quiet. "Sir, if he played like this on a broken keyboard, imagine what he'd sound like here." The director nodded slowly, almost as if he were still piecing things together. The room had never felt this silent during an audition. Usually, the judges whispered to each other, wrote notes, or quietly discussed technical details. But now, they all stared at the boy with the same expression, deep respect mixed with quiet amazement. The boy stood still beside the piano, not sure how to react. He didn't know if this silence meant something good or something bad. He just kept his hands clasped together politely, waiting for someone to speak. One of the judges finally smiled gently at him. "You have a special gift," she said. "Something you can't learn from a book or a lesson. Something natural." The boy didn't fully understand what she meant, but he smiled shyly in return. The director rubbed his forehead, then looked at the other judges. His voice was no longer joking, no longer light or tired. It carried weight, now real weight. "We need to see if this wasn't an accident," he said. "Play something else." The boy froze for a moment. He hadn't prepared another piece. He only knew a few melodies, and none of them were perfect. But he nodded quietly, sat back down, and placed his hands on the keys once again. His mother held her breath. The second piece he played wasn't flawless. He made tiny mistakes here and there, but the room didn't care. His hands moved with sincerity, not perfection. His playing felt like someone telling a story not with words, but with emotion and honesty. The softness of his touch, the small hesitations, the gentle rises and falls, they all made the performance feel alive. As he played, the director slowly stood from his chair. Not in anger, not even out of surprise. He stood because he couldn't sit through something so quietly powerful. It felt wrong to stay seated while witnessing a moment that didn't happen often. The staff members looked at him, wondering if he would actually kneel like he said earlier. But the director wasn't thinking about his joke anymore. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere deeper. When the boy finished the second piece, the room became silent once again. But this silence felt different. It wasn't shock this time, it was admiration. The director took a slow step forward, then another, and another. He stopped in front of the piano, looking at the boy for several seconds before speaking. "You didn't just play," he said quietly. "You spoke, you told us something through your music." The boy wasn't sure how to respond. He simply lowered his eyes again, shy and unsure. The director let out a soft breath, almost like someone who had finally found something precious after a long search. "You belong here," he said at last, voice firm but warm. "Not because you played perfectly, but because you played honestly." The mother placed a hand over her mouth, trying not to cry. The staff members exchanged surprised smiles. The judges nodded in agreement, and the boy, he simply stood there, confused but happy, unable to fully understand how much he had moved an entire room of adults. That what he didn't know was that this performance, this quiet, heartfelt moment had changed everything in that hall, and the director, who once joked he would kneel if the boy played well, now found himself humbled in a way he never expected. The hall stayed completely silent for a few seconds after the director spoke. It wasn't the kind of silence filled with doubt or hesitation. It was the kind of silence that comes when everyone in the room understands that something meaningful has happened, something rare, surprising, and beautiful. The boy stood there with wide eyes, not fully understanding the weight of the director's word. He knew the director was impressed, but he didn't realize just how deeply he had touched the hearts of the people in the room. His mother slowly stood from her seat, trying to keep her emotions under control. She pressed a hand gently to her chest as if to calm her racing heart. She had always believed in her son, but seeing others finally see what she saw felt unreal. For years, she watched him practice alone, repeating small melodies until he got them right. She watched him fix broken keys with tape and carefully tune the keyboard the best he could. She watched him learn without guidance, without anything that the other kids at the academy normally had access to. And now, she watched professionals look at him with admiration. The director turned away for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. It was rare for him to show emotion. Most people in the academy knew him as strict, demanding, and sometimes too serious. But today, something inside him shifted. He wasn't looking at a student who needed training. He was looking at a young musician with a natural gift, one that couldn't be ignored. One of the judges leaned forward and whispered, "We can't let him walk out without giving him a chance." The director nodded. "We won't," he replied softly. He then turned back to the boy. His expression wasn't strict now. It carried respect. "Come here," he said gently. That boy hesitated before taking small steps forward. His hands were still shaking, but not because of fear anymore. It was the kind of trembling that happens after a moment so emotional that your body doesn't know how to react. When he reached the front of the stage, the director crouched down, slightly bringing himself to the boy's height. The entire staff watched in disbelief. The director was known for speaking down to students, not kneeling or lowering himself to their level. The joke he had made earlier suddenly flashed through everyone's minds, and a few staff members wondered if he remembered it too. He did. The director looked the boy directly in the eyes and said quietly, "Earlier I made a joke. I said I'd kneel if someone played well today." The boy blinked, not sure if he should nod or stay silent. I didn't mean it literally, the director continued. But sometimes, words need to be honored before anyone could react. The director slowly went down on one knee in front of the boy. The whole gasped. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't loud or exaggerated. It was humble, planned, sincere. The director wasn't kneeling because he felt embarrassed. He wasn't kneeling because he was forced. He was kneeling because he had just witnessed something extraordinary, and this was his way of acknowledging it. The boy's mother covered her mouth with both hands, tears slipping down her cheeks. The staff members looked at one another in shock. Some of them felt guilty for doubting him earlier. The judges looked emotional too, one of them even blinking away tears. The director finally spoke again. "You gave this room something we weren't expecting," he said. "You reminded us why we love music." The boy's throat tightened. He didn't know what to do. No adult had ever kneeled in front of him in his life. He whispered softly, "Thank you." The director stood slowly, brushing off his knee. "No," he said gently. "Thank you." For a moment, the room stayed quiet again. Then one of the judges cleared her throat and said, "We should discuss his results." The director shook his head. "There's nothing to discuss." His voice was firm now, not harsh, but full of decision. He turned to the panel and said, "This boy is admitted." The mother let out a small cry of joy and quickly covered her mouth again. Her eyes were full of disbelief, gratitude, and relief all at the same time. She couldn't stop the tears that rolled down her cheeks. The boy stood frozen. He didn't know how auditions worked. He didn't know how long the process usually took or how many rounds there were supposed to be. All he knew was that the words "you are admitted" sounded like a dream one he never expected to come true. The assistant holding the clipboard quickly wrote something down, her hands shaking slightly. She was smiling, something she rarely did during auditions. "Congratulations," she said softly, her voice warm and sincere. But the director wasn't done. He walked a few steps closer to the mother and spoke gently, lowering his voice so only she and the boy could hear. "There is something you must know," he said. "The academy training is not easy, and it is not cheap." The mother's smile faded slightly, replaced with worry. She had already expected this part. She knew the academy fees were high, far too high for what she earned. Her hands tightened around her purse, and her heart began to race again. Before she could say anything, the director continued, "But when talent like this walks in, money should not be the reason it walks out." The mother looked at him uncertainly, not daring to hope too much. The director took a breath and said firmly, "We will arrange a full scholarship for him. Tuition, books, training, all covered." The mother gasped softly. She almost reached for something to hold on to. Her legs felt weak, as if they might give out. Never in her life had anyone offered something so grand, so life-changing, so unexpected, a scholarship. Everything paid for. She shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. "But why?" she whispered. "There are so many children, so many talented ones." The director gave a small smile. "Yes, but there are only a few, very few, who play from the heart before they learn technique. Technique can be taught, heart cannot." The judges nodded in agreement. The assistant wiped the corner of her eye secretly. Even the stage helpers looked emotional. The boy stood between them, absorbing everything slowly. A scholarship, a chance to learn on real pianos, a chance to grow, a chance to become something more than he ever imagined. "Do you want this?" the director asked softly, turning back to him. The boy nodded instantly. Yes, I want to learn." The director smiled warmly. "Then welcome to the academy." That simple sentence felt like a doorway opening, a heavy one, a bright one, a doorway the boy had only dreamed of, but never believed he would walk through. His mother reached out and pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him tightly. She whispered into his hair, her voice breaking, "I'm so proud of you. So proud." The boy hugged her back, his small arms reaching around her carefully. Even he couldn't stop the tears forming in his eyes. He wasn't crying loudly, just quietly soft tears that carried years of struggle, loneliness, and hope. The staff members moved quietly around the room, giving the family a moment. Some of them didn't even try to hide their soft smiles. One whispered, "He really earned it." Another nodded and said, "He's going to go far." After a few minutes, the director stepped closer again. "We'll arrange the paperwork," he said gently. "You don't need to worry about anything today. Just take this moment." The mother nodded gratefully. Before they left, the boy turned back to the piano just for a moment. He ran his hand lightly across the keys, the way someone touches something precious. He didn't play again. He didn't need to. The piano had already heard his heart as they walked toward the door. The assistant smiled at the mother and said softly, "Your son is a gift." The mother looked at her child, her eyes warm and full. "He always has been," she whispered. When they stepped outside the hall, the sunlight hit their faces gently. The boy took a deep breath. Everything felt different now. The air, the ground, the world. He wasn't just a boy who practiced on an old broken keyboard anymore. He wasn't just a quiet kid who loved melodies. He was a student of the academy now. A future musician, a child who had made a whole room go silent with nothing but his heart and his hands. What he didn't know, what he couldn't yet imagine, was how many lives his music would one day touch. But for now, he walked beside his mother with a shy smile, holding tightly onto the dream that had finally become real.